So welcome to the OpenStack Trove Day panel here. We're going to talk about public versus private cloud. As Ken mentioned, my name is Craig Tracy. I've been involved with OpenStack for over 3 years now. So in OpenStack years, that's almost an eternity. We're only 4 years old at this point. So the way I'd like to operate this panel, if it's okay with you guys, is I want you guys to be super interactive. So please feel free to ask questions. We want to get a fist fight going on up here. So please ask your hardest questions. I've prepared some questions. These are my ideas for things that would be good questions to kind of lead in with, but you should certainly feel free to follow up with that. However, as my fiance has taught me for the last 8 years, my ideas don't matter. So I want to hear your ideas. So to start off with, like I said, my name is Craig Tracy. I'm currently at a company called Blue Box. We are private cloud as a service. So if you have OpenStack needs that are compliance reasons or performance reasons or data sovereignty issues, you should talk to me afterwards. I will take my vendor hat off now. Let's just walk down the panel, I guess, and each person introduce themselves. So first, John, perhaps.
Okay. John Devereaux. I'm a technical consultant, Cloud Ninja at Marantis. So I work with the major accounts banks. And my background, I came from Oracle. I work with Ronan Kaufman out back there, and we helped develop the Oracle VM, Oracle Linux team. I was involved in the dtrace acquisition for Oracle and also the Cygo acquisition as well. And before then, I was the SME for all healthcare worldwide for Red Hat.
My name's Tim Sharp. I'm a field application engineer for Percona. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. My background is primarily in the embedded database space. And for the past year, I have moved over to the other side to MySQL.
Mike Stevenson, Director of Engineering at HubSpot. Both at HubSpot, we had experience with running databases both on the traditional private cloud, public cloud, both Amazon and Rackspace. So providing that both MySQL and NoSQL like HBase, Hadoop.
Good afternoon, Akash Chandrasekhar. I work with Canonical, the folks that make Ubuntu. I have 20 years of experience in enterprise and cloud platform building, specifically both in telcos, moving out into now the partner area, and specifically figuring out how customers like you can make yourself relevant within OpenStack.
Fantastic. Just as a note, in full disclosure, I used to work for Mike Stevenson, so I'm a former HubSpot employee. I know all the skeletons in the closet, so I will try to poke him appropriately.
That's good disclosure.
So let's start off first with we did some raises of hands earlier, but perhaps we should do another round. So one thing that I did not gather today is let's talk about cloud usage. So people who are involved in public cloud, perhaps, a raise of hand. Wow, that's fewer than I expected. And I will use public cloud to mean that very large public cloud that we don't talk about. How about private cloud? Okay, great. And then how about people, how would you consider yourselves? How about first, let's talk about operators or users. Okay, integrators or people who are interested in learning. Okay. I just wanted to see that to see if we could get an idea of what the crowd makeup was and kind of gear the questions that way. So first of all, why don't we talk about your experiences here with the cloud, whether that be public, private, or even bare metal, perhaps with Percona. So why don't we, again, go down the line. What do your customers see? Are people moving towards private cloud? If they are they moving towards something like OpenStack? Perhaps you could start there, John.
Sure, great question. I'm working right now with a couple of financial institutions, FSI accounts in Wall Street. I got some big names, I have an NDA with them. A lot of them going to the private cloud, and the reason why they're doing is security. And Thomas Drake, Edward Snowden, Sullins, and a few other NSA whistleblowers have really educated companies to say, hey, who has access to my data? How is it being accessed? Do I have control of access to that data? And now you're seeing private clouds exploding tremendously. I'm seeing it in the government of Venezuela. I'm seeing it in the Brazilian government. I've been the German government. And so we're getting a law of access where people saying, you know what? I want to have the capabilities, but I want to have it in-house. I want to be able to have the same features, similar features of like Amazon does, but I want to be able to control it. I don't want to have it managed by another foreign resource. I want to be able to control it. Lockdown security, who has access to the data. So I'm seeing private cloud exploding. That's what I'm seeing in there right now.
Okay, great.
My experience as a field engineer, I see a lot of interest in RDS, Amazon Web Services, primarily from small businesses. These are companies that are looking more for ease of use. They don't have in-house DBA. They want to set up an infrastructure that they can easily deploy to. So primarily my customer base is concerned about ease of use for small companies.
Most of our use case these days, we were early adopters of the public cloud. We used RDS, we used database as a service, as Trove is kind of trying to address. Being an early adopter, V1, V2 wasn't necessarily always meeting the requirements of what we needed, so we were always in a model where we had a major percentage of our databases that we ran ourselves and a small percentage that would run on database as a service. And we're probably at a stage right now where we've made a concerted effort over the last 12 months to move everything to be managed by us. But I would also say that database as a service things like RDS or potentially Trove, as they mature, obviously we would be looking to come back to look at those. So we look at both models.
From a perspective of a solution architect that actually goes out every day and talks to both enterprise customers and to partners, I think it really comes down to three major issues. One being what I call business velocity. I think the real problem there is the business velocity drives the choices between whether customers relatively go towards an AWS or an OpenStack type of environment. AWS specifically because maybe they want to spin up VMs as quickly as possible, and that's a primary goal. Versus OpenStack, from a business velocity issue, is how do they get the development and the operations to be at the speed of business and trying to solve that problem internal and have control. That's part one. Part two is relevancy. For partners like you, OpenStack is a game changer. It's sort of Linux all over again, isn't it? Right? And why do I say that? Relevancy from the perspective of maybe you did fantastic selling XYZ component or piece of hardware in on-premise, and now OpenStack presents you with a challenge. How do I become relevant within that specific area? That may be your component having the code being upstream. Maybe it's a continuous deployment and a continuous integration issue that you're trying to solve. And it's also relevancy for companies like eBay and PayPal. How do you become relevant within OpenStack so that your specific code makes it upstream and the next versions that go into Juno allow you to have a higher level of business velocity? The next and final point that I'd like to make is a maturity issue. OpenStack and AWS present different maturity level issues for customers. From an AWS perspective, spinning up VMs was great, but now you have to deal with cloud formations. How do you integrate into cloud formations? Are you going to use something like Netflix OSS to get it done? In an OpenStack area, it's a maturity issue again. Is a 10-node cluster really going to get everything done for you? And does it have enough components for HA? What about security? And so as you go up the levels of even an OpenStack development or deployment, you start to deal with maturity issues. So those three components, business velocity, relevancy, or how do I become relevant, and maturity are the three components that we see every day from a canonical perspective.
Awesome. So Mike, can you talk about why you pulled databases back from something like an RDS and built it in-house, and what were the challenges around that? Do you find that your velocity has increased? Do you find that there's extra burden in terms of having to manage that sort of stuff? And what solutions did you use to kind of get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, part of it was the fact that, again, we were early adopters of a technology that didn't have all the requirements that we needed, either to read slaves or multi-AZ kind of functionality or things to that nature. So part of the reason was to standardize our environment and make sure that we were consistent across the board. We actually run in a model where we have our own tools in-house that we give developers in our environment have the ability to spin up their capacity, spin up their MySQL clusters as needed. So we kind of really run in the operator model, even though we have a data operations team that will take care of kind of the expert level needs. So we kind of run in that model where we want to be consistent and standardized because we build our own tools to give that capacity to our development team. But at the same time, we need to be have all the features and functionality that some of the database as a service models like RDS didn't have. Again, I would say that that was pre-12 months ago, and some of those things have changed over time, which I'd expect from Trove also.
Great. Well, enough about cloud. Why not just bare metal? Why wouldn't we just manage this with bare metal? Anybody on the panel?
Well, encapsulating an application allows me the agility to move it. If I need to do hardware maintenance, I can simply move over an instance. Or in bare metal, you have to go through the old process way of installing, patching. What if the patch didn't work right and you screwed up? Sometimes, you know, an old patch, sorry, Ronan, an old patch doesn't work right and an application or an Oracle product or even a third-party product fails. I have that snapshot to recover that application very quickly. Virtualization is not about simply agility and everything else. In my opinion, virtualization is about recoverability. Being able to recover a corruption, a software, or an application, or a service in minutes rather than hours in the old process way. And like I said, then I can also leverage different hardware vendors as well, where you don't have vendor lock, so you can basically control your costs in that way too. So there's a lot of advantages in virtualization.
I think that to answer that question, there's a fundamental paradigm shift that's occurred. You know, people used to deploy machines, right, on bare metal, and then the OS and the application. And the applications then were coupled together, and you had these reference architectures, and reference architectures necessarily didn't match what was there with the underlying hardware. The paradigm shift is that triangle is upside down now. The applications and the reference architectures really define what it is that you need underneath to support that. And you have to wrap your head around that, because companies like eBay and PayPal, their reference architectures define how their business is going to operate and run. By running in VMs, those specific reference architectures can change. Components can be taken out, right? You can replace those. So today you might have Couchbase. Tomorrow you might have Mongo. And it might be because that specific application, that workload is tuned and optimized for that specific type of workload. And so the underlying infrastructure has to be able to support it.
Okay, does it? So in public cloud today, can I get instances that will support workloads that are perhaps demanding perhaps IO-intensive workloads?
Having worked in that kind of region, and I'll talk about a large retailer in Portland, Oregon. I'm sure you'll figure out who that is. And I'll give you a direct example. They sat there for about 4.5 weeks, and they had gone in with an all-in strategy over to the very large public cloud provider that we all come to know, also in the Pacific Northwest. And the first vision of it is, sweet, we can deploy VMs. This is so cool. I don't have to wait like 3 weeks. Then they started taking a look at Couchbase and deploying it and did it all manually. And then they went ahead and deployed MongoDB and did it all manually and started running all these performance data and figured out, like, oh man, now that I've tied it to my workload, which is, again, one of the most important things that you need to take a look at when you're designing these clouds, that things were a mismatch. And they had to actually go with a third database that wasn't on the list. The next part of it is, how do I tie this all into my deployment strategy? So some of the promises that are out there, even on public cloud for speed, still go back to 101 of how do I tie this back into my development operations practices. You can't avoid that, whether you're in OpenStack or AWS, but the instant speed issue, I think, is a misnomer. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, the one thing I would say on the bare metal, the VM to that conversation is that I'm not sure that from a consumer perspective it matters that much. We actually spent a lot of work on trying to run bare metal, and if we had the right workload and we designed the right instance type for it, I think it would be fine. I think for us, it's really about velocity of development. I mean, we just swapped out our complete technology at HubSpot on MySQL in a matter of weeks, and something that would take months to provision that hardware to even try it out and see if it works. So from our perspective, the tooling we've built from an automation perspective, it really doesn't matter if it's a VM or bare metal to us. It's really around, can I have that capacity as fast as I need it? And that's a challenge across any kind of environment.
And now with Ironic, you can do both.
Yeah, so I was going to ask that, is Ironic a bit of a game changer? Like, so we recently saw Rackspace with on metal. Is that a game changer?
I think it's going to give customers more of a choice now, because there's certain areas where you don't want to encapsulate because the I/O is too intensive. So OpenStack now gives you the option of having either a bare metal strategy deployment, again, like you said, reference architecture. And then on the other side, you can benefit from virtualization from like the benefits we just said about agility, recoverability, scaling. So that's one thing about OpenStack is it's evolving. It's customers are demanding more and more services, and the community, from the Linux years that we've all been playing in the Linux community, we've all matured now, and now OpenStack is moving much, much faster than Linux is in features and maturity. So I would agree with you on that, definitely. So it is a game changer.
Okay, you brought me right to my next question. Is that a good thing? Is the velocity that OpenStack moves at a good thing? And does that affect the maturity of the project itself?
I think that it's good that the customers are demanding, the industry is pushing OpenStack to move faster, because one customer is completely different from another customer, but having that framework that we helped develop allows it to be customized per individual, and having such a community working together, evolving those technologies, pushing the button, basically putting pressure in the projects is key to making us move faster. I mean, that's how we respond better, is with pressure, with stress. I see that as a real positive thing, in my opinion, and I think, and it's changing the gameplay in the industry, particularly in the proprietary environment, where the open source environment is literally not only just catching up, but superseding in certain areas.
Okay, and now you at Amarantis, though, are subject matter experts for OpenStack, right? So that makes a lot of sense to me, where you can move from an ice house to a Juno to a Kilo very quickly. But how about for someone who's doing do-it-yourself OpenStack? Is that viable? Is that a viable option? Can they work at that?
I would say that is it an option? Yes. Is it the most viable option? I would tend to say no. It's a bad option, and the reason is that the domain expertise that's required across compute, network, and storage alone, and then tying in the components and being able to get the performance in each of those three areas is just insurmountable, I would have to say, for many of the organizations that are trying to put OpenStack architectures together. From a canonical perspective, we obviously have a solution that captures reference architectures and is able to deploy OpenStack very, very easily, and then to a level of scale. And we find that hurdle of being able to put that down gets you back to 101. What was this all about again? That's right, deploying of your workloads and services. We're spending so much time, right, trying to figure out how Neutron works and why it doesn't work and why Glance doesn't work and why Horizon works, that you forget the original objective. That's right.
Pulling your hair.
To get your architectures up and running, right? Remember, you had to deploy a service. How do we get that done? And so our objective is to get the customers at that point where it goes back to their workloads so you can learn to scale it up and deliver it as a service, right? That's the whole point. And I think that's the goal and the objective. It's the challenge for OpenStack. You need to kind of get away from the underlying components, get them working, get them integrated, and let's talk about the services again at the higher level. Yep.
Great. All right. Anybody in the audience have a question? I will do my best to repeat the question, so if we don't want to move around.
John, you mentioned shying away from encapsulation with I/O-intensive applications, and that being a reason. Is it when you're saying you're not going to, you're looking at bare metal versus virtualized for I/O-intensive apps? Is that due to a problem with the compute layer, or is that a problem with the storage layer?
It depends. I'll give you an example. If you're running an Oracle database or Oracle RAC very heavily intensive, and you're running at the capacity of the system you have, I would blame the hardware. I would definitely use bare metal on that certain area. But if you're not utilizing full resources of that system, yes, you can encapsulate that. And that's what's cool about OpenStack, especially with the Ironic project, allows you to have an option. So OpenStack is not virtualization. OpenStack is an orchestration tool. And some individuals, I won't mention names, kind of took a jab at us and said that we're into the about virtualization. We don't care about virtualization. It's a component of OpenStack, but it's not your entire solution. It depends on the application. If your application is capaciting the entire resource of that system, why would you encapsulate it? Because you're going to have a certain percentage of I/O being dedicated to translating virtual to physical, from virtual I/O to physical I/O, CPU scheduling to virtual CPU scheduling to physical CPU scheduling, and you're going to lose a certain percentage of performance from that system. Why would you do that? I mean, I have some government agencies I worked when I was in Oracle where they had one application virtualized on a host, and then they'd be able to move that because they like to be able to have that agility, just to have that one application on that physical server to move it anywhere I want to go. Is it economically feasible for those who don't have the luxury of having taxpayer money? No, but there are options, sir. So, I mean, I hope I answered your question. I wasn't, you know, it depends on the situation, depends on the application, depends on how much resources you're allocating. But there are benefits, of course, with virtualization over bare.
All right, thanks.
Other questions right now?
So, DevCore, will that solve some of the issues?
Yes, so the question is, so if you're not familiar, there's an initiative amongst the OpenStack Foundation called DevCore. The objective, I'm going to paraphrase, is basically to ensure that when you brand something as OpenStack, it is actually running components that are necessary for OpenStack to be called OpenStack. So, for instance, Nova may be considered a core component